Most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded in history, from a solo desert camper fatally bitten by a hidden rattlesnake far from help, to a stubborn rice farmer who stepped barefoot into a flooded field where a Russell's viper was waiting. It was March 15, 2016, in a rural area outside Phoenix, Arizona. The converted garage sat behind a modest ranch house, its windows painted black from the inside. Makeshift plywood shelving held dozens of cracked aquariums held together with duct tape. Craig Winters was 34, a part-time pizza delivery driver who had become obsessed with venomous snakes after reading a single outdated herpetology textbook from 1987 that he found at a garage sale. The textbook clearly emphasized professional snake hooks and restraint tubes, equipment Craig neither owned nor believed he needed. Despite the book's detailed safety protocols, Craig had completely ignored these sections, focusing only on the parts describing different species and their venom potency. Craig believed that reading one 30-year-old book made him qualified to handle the deadliest snakes in North America. He had never consulted current literature, spoken to veterinarians, or contacted experienced keepers. His handling technique consisted of using modified kitchen utensils and homemade tools he had crafted based on crude diagrams from his ancient textbook. The garage was a disaster waiting to happen. No safety equipment, no anti-venom, no emergency protocols, and no one even knew what he was doing. Craig frequently referenced his worn textbook during handling sessions, actually stopping mid-procedure to flip through pages while holding dangerous snakes. The book's safety recommendations were 3 decades out of date, and Craig was following techniques that had been proven deadly years before he was even born. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among the largest venomous snakes in the southwestern United States. Adults average 3 to 5 feet in length, weighing 3 to 4 pounds. They can strike at speeds reaching 2/3 their body length in under 0.2 seconds. These snakes are highly defensive when cornered or stressed. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, designed to break down blood cells and tissue, with a typical adult bite delivering 250 to 350 milligrams of venom. The venom contains a complex mixture of enzymes that destroy red blood cells, damage blood vessel walls, and prevent normal clotting. Effects that can prove fatal without proper medical intervention. The incident occurred when Craig made perhaps the most foolish decision of his short career as a snake keeper. He decided to move his largest and most dangerous snake, a 4-foot Western diamondback that he had illegally acquired from an out-of-state dealer, to what he thought was a better enclosure. The snake had been crammed into a cracked 20-gallon aquarium, barely able to move, and had become a coiled ball of pure aggression. Craig consulted his ancient textbook, which recommended proper snake hooks and restraint tubes for safe handling. Instead of recognizing that he was completely unequipped for this task, Craig decided to make his own handling tool. He bent a coat hanger into a loop, apparently believing that 30 cents worth of wire would protect him from one of North America's deadliest snakes. As Craig opened the cracked aquarium lid, the rattlesnake immediately went into full defensive mode, coiling tightly and rattling continuously. Craig attempted to slip his bent coat hanger around the rattlesnake's neck, apparently believing he could lasso a lightning-fast predator like he was roping cattle. The stressed animal struck upward through the pathetic restraint with explosive speed. The strike lasted less than half a second, but the snake's fangs sank deep into Craig's right forearm just below the elbow, delivering a substantial venom load directly into his tissue before immediately withdrawing. Blood immediately poured from 2 distinct fang marks, each several millimeters apart. Craig dropped his useless coat hanger tool and stumbled backward, knocking over several containers and sending other snakes into defensive frenzies. Rather than immediately calling for help, Craig made his second catastrophically stupid decision of the day. He sat down and actually tried to time his symptoms while consulting the book's treatment section. The text recommended applying ice and elevating the wound, practices no longer recommended by modern medicine and unlikely to help his situation. The swelling had already begun creeping past his elbow when Craig finally looked up from the book's yellowed pages. His fingers had started tingling, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. Symptoms the textbook had mentioned, but described in clinical, detached language that bore no resemblance to the reality now consuming his arm. He tried flexing his hand and found his grip weakening noticeably. The bite site had turned a dark purple red, with streaks of discoloration radiating outward like twisted branches. Still, Craig convinced himself that the ice and elevation were working, that he just needed a few more minutes for the swelling to stop. The clock on the garage wall ticked past the 20-minute mark since the bite. Craig spent 35 precious minutes following these outdated instructions while the venom spread through his lymphatic system. During this time, swelling began at the bite site and started progressing up his arm at an alarming rate. More critically, early venom effects had begun impairing his blood's clotting mechanisms, setting the stage for what would become a fatal combination of injuries. The pain quickly intensified beyond anything Craig had imagined from his textbook's sanitized descriptions. His arm began to feel heavy and numb, while the swelling continued expanding. Craig noticed his heart rate increasing dramatically and began experiencing waves of nausea and dizziness as the venom's hemotoxins began destroying his red blood cells. When Craig began experiencing severe symptoms and his blood pressure started dropping, he finally realized that his textbook might not have prepared him for reality. The venom had caused significant coagulopathy, making his blood unable to clot properly, a condition that would prove catastrophic. Craig stumbled to his car and attempted to drive to a hospital, but his condition rapidly deteriorated as the venom's effects intensified. His vision blurred from the envenomation effects, and he lost control of the vehicle as his coordination failed. His car rolled through an intersection and struck a utility pole with devastating force. The crash caused severe internal trauma, including ruptured organs and massive hemorrhaging. With his blood's clotting mechanisms actively deteriorating from the venom, Craig's body could not control the internal bleeding from these major injuries. The combination of progressive coagulopathy and severe trauma created a medical emergency that would prove unsurvivable. When paramedics arrived, they found Craig unconscious with severe swelling at the bite site and signs of massive internal bleeding that his compromised blood could not control. His blood pressure was critically low, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. He was immediately intubated and transported to a trauma center with lights and sirens. At the hospital, doctors faced a complex challenge. Hospital laboratory tests confirmed severe venom-induced coagulopathy that made it impossible to control the substantial internal bleeding from the vehicle collision. Despite aggressive treatment, including blood transfusions and emergency antivenom administration, the combination of major trauma and progressive clotting failure had created fatal complications. Craig died approximately 4 hours after the bite from complications of massive internal hemorrhaging. The severe crash injuries, which included ruptured internal organs, became unsurvivable due to the venom's effects on his blood's ability to clot. Medical examiners determined that while the 25-minute delay in seeking treatment had allowed venom-induced coagulopathy to develop, it was the combination of this blood disorder with severe collision trauma that proved fatal. The hemotoxins had disrupted his blood's clotting mechanisms, making the internal bleeding from the crash impossible to control. Investigators discovered the garage collection during a property search and were appalled by the conditions. The 12 venomous snakes, all illegally possessed without permits, were found in deplorable housing, with several dead from dehydration and temperature extremes. The case was ruled an accidental death caused by envenomation-induced coagulopathy, complicated by vehicular trauma. Animal control officers safely removed the surviving snakes and transferred them to licensed facilities. The investigation revealed that Craig had no permits, no training, and no business handling animals that required years of experience to manage safely. It was September 12, 2023, when the demands of supporting a young family led to a deadly encounter at a rural auto repair shop outside Lafayette, Louisiana. The small garage sat isolated along a seldom-traveled back road, surrounded by dense cypress swamps that provided perfect habitat for the region's most secretive serpents. The shop's location meant that wildlife frequently sought shelter in dark spaces beneath the building during cooler autumn nights. Spencer Wallace, a 28-year-old mechanic, had been working at the shop for 3 years while supporting his wife, Maria, and their 6-month-old daughter. Known for his willingness to help stranded motorists regardless of the hour, Spencer often took emergency calls to supplement his modest income. That night, he had received a call from a driver whose car had broken down on the remote highway. Spencer's dedication to providing for his growing family had led him to work increasingly long hours, often alone at the shop during nights and weekends. The eastern coral snake represents one of North America's most dangerous yet elusive serpents, despite its small size and secretive nature. These brightly banded snakes rarely exceed 3 feet in length, but possess potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system with deadly efficiency. Their distinctive red, yellow, and black bands serve as a warning, though their shy disposition means encounters with humans are extremely rare. Unlike rattlesnakes, coral snakes deliver venom through small, fixed fangs that inject neurotoxins evolved to paralyze prey. The venom works slowly and silently, producing minimal initial symptoms while gradually shutting down the victim's respiratory system. The customer's vehicle had been sitting motionless for several hours when Spencer arrived to begin the emergency repair. He successfully fixed the electrical problem, sending the customer on their way near midnight. Spencer began cleaning up his workspace and organizing tools in the storage area behind the shop. Unknown to him, an eastern coral snake had taken shelter beneath a pile of old tires and automotive parts, seeking protection from the cooling temperatures. Spencer reached into the dark storage area to retrieve a wrench that had fallen behind the tire pile. His hand disturbed the small snake hidden in the debris beneath the stored materials. The startled coral snake, with no escape route available, defensively bit Spencer's index finger before quickly retreating deeper into the pile. Spencer pulled his hand back and used his phone's flashlight, catching a glimpse of the snake's distinctive banded pattern as it disappeared. He examined his finger under the work light, finding only 2 tiny puncture wounds that barely bled. Having grown up in Louisiana, Spencer recognized the coral snake, but had heard conflicting information about their danger level. The bite seemed insignificant compared to rattlesnake encounters he had heard about, leading Spencer to continue his cleanup work. He washed the wound with soap and water, but decided against seeking immediate medical attention due to the late hour and minimal symptoms. The neurotoxic venom began its silent work immediately. Though Spencer noticed no obvious symptoms during the first 2 hours, he finished organizing the shop and completed paperwork, feeling only slight soreness at the bite site. The coral snake's venom contains powerful neurotoxins that block nerve signals throughout the body, but produces few visible external symptoms during early stages. Spencer attributed his mild fatigue to the late hour and long workday. Over the next 4 hours, Spencer began experiencing subtle symptoms that he dismissed as exhaustion. Slight dizziness and mild nausea seemed consistent with working past midnight, while barely perceptible weakness in his hands appeared related to the repair work. The neurotoxic venom was systematically blocking nerve transmission throughout his body, but the effects remained nearly imperceptible until they reached critical levels. Spencer dozed fitfully in his office chair, unaware his condition was deteriorating. As dawn approached, Spencer's condition deteriorated rapidly as the venom reached his respiratory system. His breathing became increasingly shallow as the neurotoxins paralyzed the muscles responsible for lung function. Spencer attempted to reach his phone, but found his coordination severely impaired. He collapsed at his workbench as respiratory paralysis set in, unable to call for assistance as his nervous system shut down. The venom had silently blocked the nerve signals controlling his breathing, leading to complete respiratory failure. Spencer died from respiratory paralysis caused by eastern coral snake neurotoxins, his body showing no obvious external signs except 2 tiny puncture wounds on his finger. Frank Rodriguez, the shop owner, discovered Spencer's body when he arrived for the morning shift, initially unable to determine the cause until the small bite marks were noticed during medical examination. The incident prompted Louisiana health officials to issue warnings about coral snake encounters in rural work environments. Spencer's family received support from the local community and co-workers, who established a fund for Maria and their infant daughter. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife developed new safety protocols for workers in rural locations. It was March 15, 2016, and the sprawling desert landscape outside Phoenix, Arizona, stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun. The isolated ranch-style home sat on 5 acres of scrubland, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings that provided perfect habitat for the region's diverse reptile population. The property's remote location, nearly 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, offered complete privacy for activities that most people would consider unthinkably dangerous. Diane Kruger had been living alone in this desert sanctuary for 8 years, ever since her divorce from a husband who couldn't understand her growing fascination with venomous snakes. At 47, the insurance adjuster had transformed her modest home into something resembling a private zoo, with over 30 species of deadly serpents housed in custom-built enclosures throughout every room. What had started as a casual interest in reptiles during a childhood visit to the zoo had evolved into a consuming obsession that dominated every aspect of her life. Diane's collection represented years of careful acquisition through reptile shows, private breeders, and online forums where enthusiasts traded rare specimens. She had no formal training in herpetology or venom extraction, but considered herself an expert through decades of self-study and hands-on experience. Her neighbors remained blissfully unaware of the deadly menagerie living just miles from their own homes, and Diane preferred it that way. The crown jewel of her collection was a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback rattlesnake that she had acquired just 2 weeks earlier from a breeder in Georgia. The massive serpent, with its distinctive diamond-patterned scales and considerable size, was regarded as one of the most formidable venomous snakes in North America among experienced handlers. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults commonly reaching 5 to 6 feet in length and weighing several pounds. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, capable of causing rapid swelling, significant tissue damage, clotting disruption, and systemic shock without prompt medical treatment. Large individuals can deliver substantial venom in a single defensive strike, and severe envenomations can become life-threatening if care is delayed, especially in remote areas where response times are extended. That Sunday evening, a partially filled glass of wine was found on the kitchen counter, and feeding tools were laid out nearby, indicating she had been tending to her collection before the incident. The enclosure for the eastern diamondback was open, and the water bowl had been removed, suggesting she began routine cleaning while moving through her feeding tasks. Diane opened the custom-built terrarium and reached across the enclosure to remove the water bowl. Gloves and handling tools were present in the room, but were not in use when responders later examined the scene. The terrarium door was fully open, the bowl was positioned on the table beside her tools, and the placement suggested she was midway through a routine cleaning step when the incident occurred. When investigators arrived, the eastern diamondback was found coiled at the rear of the enclosure, a posture consistent with a defensive response after a disturbance. Based on the angle of the bite marks on Diane's forearm and the blood pattern on the floor, her arm entered the snake's strike range while she was reaching inside the enclosure. Eastern diamondbacks deliver extremely fast defensive strikes, and the wound spacing matched a rapid forward extension typical for the species. The puncture depth on her forearm indicated a full strike and release, which aligns with the species' normal behavior. Large rattlesnakes typically inject significant venom during such strikes, and the immediate swelling and blood loss documented at the scene were consistent with a high-volume envenomation. After striking, the snake retreated to the back corner, where it remained until responders secured it. Blood from the puncture wounds formed a trail from the enclosure toward the adjacent room, indicating she moved away immediately after the bite. Her phone was recovered on the floor nearby, consistent with an attempted call. Rapid swelling, discoloration, and bleeding at the bite site matched significant hemotoxic envenomation. Without antivenom, systemic effects typically progress over hours, producing increasing weakness and impaired coordination. The extent of swelling, discoloration, and tissue damage observed during examination reflected the progression of untreated hemotoxic envenomation. Such effects can lead to shock and organ failure without rapid antivenom administration, and the remote location significantly delayed any chance of medical intervention. With no access to immediate care, she deteriorated over the next several hours and ultimately lost consciousness inside the home. A postal worker discovered Diane's body 3 days later when accumulated mail raised concern. Responding officers found numerous venomous snakes housed throughout the residence, some in improvised enclosures, but all were contained. Wildlife officials temporarily seized the animals for evaluation and initiated a review of her permits and housing conditions. Local authorities later examined existing exotic animal oversight procedures but did not implement immediate law changes. It was March 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhoods of Phoenix, Arizona basked under the desert sun as Bobby Chen worked in his converted garage laboratory. The 34-year-old software engineer had transformed the space into an elaborate reptile facility, complete with custom-built enclosures and climate control systems that housed his secret collection of exotic venomous snakes. Bobby had been illegally importing venomous species for 3 years, building a collection that included 12 different species from around the world. His neighbors had no idea that deadly serpents lived just feet from their own homes, as Bobby had carefully concealed his hobby behind the facade of a normal suburban lifestyle. He had learned everything about snake care from online videos and forums, never receiving formal training in handling venomous species. Bobby worked as a senior developer for a major tech company, earning a substantial salary that funded his expensive and dangerous hobby. He had started with harmless species before gradually acquiring more dangerous specimens through underground networks and illegal wildlife dealers. His garage had been meticulously converted with temperature controls, humidity systems, and specialized lighting to accommodate species from tropical climates. His prize specimen was a massive gaboon viper from West Africa, a snake he had acquired through illegal wildlife trafficking networks. The snake lived in a custom enclosure that Bobby had built himself, though the habitat was inadequate for such a dangerous animal. Bobby's lack of proper training and equipment had created a disaster waiting to happen, and his habit of drinking beer while performing routine maintenance on his collection would prove fatal. Gaboon vipers are among the world's most dangerous snakes, possessing the longest fangs of any venomous species at up to 2 inches in length. They can inject massive amounts of venom in a single bite, with their cytotoxic poison causing severe tissue death and organ failure. Gaboon vipers are ambush predators with incredible striking speed despite their heavy build, and their excellent camouflage makes them nearly invisible when motionless. Their venom is associated with high mortality without rapid antivenom administration. Bobby had been drinking beer while cleaning multiple snake enclosures, a routine he performed every weekend to maintain his collection. The alcohol had impaired his judgment and slowed his reflexes, making him careless around animals that demanded absolute precision and respect. When he reached the gaboon viper's enclosure, Bobby made the fatal decision to clean the habitat while the snake was still inside. Bobby opened the enclosure door and reached inside with his cleaning tools, believing the snake was docile enough to allow his presence. The gaboon viper lay coiled in the corner of its enclosure, perfectly camouflaged among the artificial plants and substrate. displaying the natural defensive behavior that made these serpents such effective ambush predators. The moment Bobby's hand entered the enclosure, the gaboon viper struck with devastating speed in a defensive response to the perceived threat. Its massive head shot forward, and the 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Bobby's forearm, injecting an enormous dose of cytotoxic venom. Bobby screamed and jerked his arm back, but the snake had already delivered what would prove to be a fatal envenomation. Bobby immediately called 911, but his location in suburban Phoenix presented a unique problem. Identifying the exact species and locating appropriate antivenom would prove logistically complex and time-consuming. The exotic nature of his collection meant that standard snakebite protocols required modification, as emergency rooms needed to identify the specific species before determining treatment options. The gaboon viper venom began its devastating work immediately, causing massive tissue death at the bite site, while simultaneously attacking Bobby's internal organs. His forearm swelled to twice its normal size as the cytotoxic poison destroyed muscle, fat, and blood vessels. The venom's hemotoxic components began breaking down his blood cells, causing progressive bleeding throughout his body. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and immediately began providing airway support, intravenous fluids, pain control, and continuous monitoring of Bobby's vital signs. They worked to stabilize his condition while frantically coordinating with poison control centers and herpetologists to identify the exact species and locate appropriate antivenom. Bobby was rushed to the nearest trauma center, where doctors continued supportive care while the antivenom was being located and transported. The delay in obtaining the specific antivenom, combined with the massive dose of venom Bobby had received, created a race against time that medical personnel ultimately could not win. Bobby died from hemorrhagic shock and multiple organ failure 36 hours after the bite, his body overwhelmed by the massive dose of exotic venom despite aggressive medical intervention. Police discovered his illegal collection during the investigation, finding 11 other venomous snakes in various stages of poor health. Bobby's death shocked his family and neighbors, who had no idea about his dangerous hobby. The case led to stricter enforcement of exotic animal laws and enhanced training for emergency responders dealing with unusual envenomation. His death also prompted hospitals in areas with known exotic pet ownership to develop better protocols for identifying and treating non-native snake envenomations. It was July 19, 2015, on the outskirts of Yangon, Myanmar. The sky was heavy with moisture after a long day of rain, and the fields glistened under a pale moon. What began as a routine check of irrigation would, within the hour, leave a family broken and a community reminded of dangers they had long tried to warn against. Min Thu was 47, a rice farmer who had lived his entire life in the same village outside Yangon. He was known among neighbors for his tireless work ethic, often rising before dawn and returning to his small home late at night. His reputation, though, carried another trait, a stubborn dismissal of caution. Where others wore boots in the fields, he preferred to work barefoot, claiming he could feel the earth better. Warnings about snakes drew little more than a shrug. He told friends that he had been in the paddies since childhood and knew how to handle himself. For Min, farming was not just survival, but legacy. He had 3 children and wanted to leave them fertile land and a steady livelihood. His routines rarely changed. He checked dikes, repaired embankments, and walked the same muddy trails daily. That evening, a leaking ditch threatened to flood a section of the crop. Despite nightfall and wet ground, he insisted on going out to fix it. His teenage son carried a lantern behind him, reluctant but obedient. The decision made sense to Min. Delays risked crop damage, and he believed he could handle the field as he always had. Russell's vipers, common in Myanmar, thrive in farmlands and grasslands. Averaging 4 feet in length, they are stocky, with a distinctive chain-like pattern along their bodies. Unlike many snakes, they rely on ambush, coiling in grass and striking with little warning. Their venom is one of the deadliest in Asia, destroying blood's ability to clot and leading to rapid bleeding, organ failure, and often death within hours. Farmers are frequent victims, their bare feet and ankles easy targets. Several warnings had been given in the days prior. Villagers had killed a viper near the fields. Its body displayed blade as a reminder. Neighbors told Min to wear shoes, or at least carry a stick to test the ground. Even his son hesitated, asking if they should wait until morning. But Min brushed off each concern, saying the snakes killed more rats than men, and stepped into the dark, wet field. They reached the embankment where the water was leaking, and Min crouched low to inspect it. His son held the lantern high, its beam cutting through the grass. Just as Min shifted his weight to step onto the ridge, movement stirred beside his bare ankle. A Russell's Viper, coiled tightly in the grass, launched forward with terrifying speed. The first strike landed just above his ankle, fangs punching deep. Before Min could recoil, the snake struck again, sinking into nearly the same spot. His son shouted, the lantern shaking wildly as Min staggered backward. The snake retreated into the grass, its patterned body vanishing almost instantly. Min clutched his leg, gasping. Within minutes, symptoms began. His breaths grew shallow, and he dropped to his knees. His son tried to help him stand, but Min vomited into the dirt. His skin paled, sweat glistening across his forehead, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. He tried to steady himself, but his legs buckled. The boy sprinted back toward the village, screaming for help. Neighbors rushed, arriving to find Min convulsing in the mud. His gums bled openly, streaks of red down his chin. His skin began to blotch purple, swelling grotesquely around the bite. One man lifted him into a makeshift stretcher, but his body jerked violently, blood pooling beneath him as he thrashed. Attempts to calm him were useless. His veins were flooding with venom that shredded clotting factors, his body bleeding internally while swelling outward. The convulsions grew worse, his limbs striking the wood of the cart. Neighbors tried binding his leg with cloth, but the bleeding spread from his mouth and nose. His son clung to his side, sobbing, as Min's body seized again, then sagged heavily. For more than an hour, they struggled to keep him stable as his condition deteriorated, but by the time they reached the edge of the village, his breathing had slowed to shallow gasps, then stopped entirely. He was dead. The neighbors lowered him from the cart onto the wet ground. Lantern light flickered across his body, already still, his chest unmoving. His son remained beside him, crying. In the days that followed, villagers avoided the section of field where Min had been bitten. Some carried sticks when walking near the paddies, striking the grass before each step. Children were told to stay off the embankments entirely, and men spoke in low tones about the sound of Min's convulsions echoing in their ears. The spot where he collapsed became a place people skirted after dark, a reminder carved into routine rather than into stone. For his family, every walk to the fields passed through an invisible boundary where work, memory, and fear could never again be separated. It was August 11th, 2013, and the Florida Everglades shimmered under the brutal summer sun, a vast expanse of sawgrass and cypress swamps that stretched to the horizon. Deep in the remote backcountry of Everglades National Park, where tourists rarely ventured and cell phone signals disappeared, freelance wildlife photographer David Thompson moved carefully along an abandoned trail. The air was thick with humidity and the buzz of mosquitoes, while the distant splash of alligators and the calls of wading birds created the soundtrack of America's most dangerous wilderness. At 38, David had built a reputation for capturing images that other photographers wouldn't attempt, getting impossibly close to dangerous wildlife through a combination of patience, skill, and calculated risk-taking. He had been documenting the invasive Burmese python problem in the Everglades for National Geographic, spending weeks alone in the swamps to photograph these massive Asian snakes that were devastating the native ecosystem. His work had already produced several award-winning images, but David was always pushing for something more dramatic, more intimate, more dangerous. The Everglades python invasion had reached crisis levels by 2013, with tens of thousands of the massive constrictors established throughout South Florida. These snakes, originally released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, had found perfect conditions in the subtropical swamps, growing to enormous sizes and reproducing rapidly. David's assignment was to document their impact on native wildlife, but he had become obsessed with capturing the perfect portrait of one of the true giants, a mature female that could exceed 18 feet in length. Burmese pythons in the Everglades often grow larger than their wild Asian counterparts. With unlimited prey and no natural predators to control their growth, females can reach lengths over 20 feet, and weights exceeding 200 pounds, making them apex predators capable of killing alligators, deer, and even panthers. They are ambush hunters that rely on stealth and explosive striking power, remaining motionless for hours before attacking with lightning speed. Their heat-sensing abilities allow them to detect warm-blooded prey from considerable distances, and their constricting power can crush bones and stop hearts within minutes. That morning, David discovered what he had been searching for: a massive female Burmese python sunning herself on a remote trail deep in the park's interior. The snake was enormous, easily 15 feet long and thick as a telephone pole, her golden and brown patterns perfectly defined in the dappled sunlight. She appeared sluggish from the heat, her massive head resting on her coils, while her body stretched across the narrow path. David estimated her weight at nearly 180 pounds, making this one of the largest pythons he had encountered during months of fieldwork. David approached slowly, his camera equipment ready, believing the snake was too lethargic from the heat to pose any immediate threat. He had photographed dozens of large pythons during his career and felt confident in his ability to read their behavior and maintain safe distances. But as he moved closer, positioning himself for the intimate portrait he envisioned, he failed to recognize the subtle signs of alertness: the slight lifting of the snake's head, the way her tongue flicked more rapidly, the almost imperceptible tensing of muscles beneath her scales. The attack was swift and devastating. The massive python struck with explosive force, her head covering the distance between them faster than David could react. Her powerful jaws clamped around his thigh as her body began wrapping around his legs and torso with crushing strength. David's camera flew from his hands as he was pulled to the ground, 180 pounds of muscle coiling around him with methodical precision. The python's grip tightened with each of David's struggles, her powerful coils compressing his chest and abdomen, while simultaneously dragging him off the trail into dense vegetation. David's cries for help echoed through the empty swamp, but his remote location meant no one could hear his desperate calls. The snake's constricting pressure increased steadily, crushing his ribs and preventing him from drawing breath as she pulled him deeper into the undergrowth. Within minutes, David's movements ceased as the python's deadly embrace stopped his heart and collapsed his lungs. The massive snake maintained her grip for over an hour, ensuring her perceived threat was completely neutralized before beginning the slow process of consumption. Over the following days, the python methodically swallowed David's body entirely, her elastic jaws and expandable throat allowing her to consume prey much larger than her head. Park rangers began searching when David failed to check in at his scheduled time 3 days later. They found his camera equipment scattered along the remote trail, the memory cards revealing his final photographs of the massive python. But despite extensive searches involving helicopters and tracking dogs, David's body was never recovered. The python had likely consumed him completely and retreated deeper into the vast swamp, leaving no trace of her victim. The National Park Service investigation concluded that David had violated park safety protocols by working alone in remote areas and approaching dangerous wildlife too closely. New regulations were implemented requiring photographers to work with guides when documenting large predators, and warning signs were posted throughout python habitat areas. David's disappearance sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community, where he was remembered as talented but increasingly reckless in his pursuit of dramatic images. His final photographs were published posthumously, serving as both a tribute to his skill and a warning about the dangers of getting too close to apex predators. It was June 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhood in Houston, Texas buzzed with the typical activity of a warm summer evening. Children played in front yards while parents tended gardens, and neighbors chatted over fence lines, creating the picture of American suburban tranquility. Behind the walls of one modest ranch home, however, a far more dangerous reality existed that none of the friendly neighbors could have imagined. Jennifer Valdez had been living her double life for over 2 years, maintaining the appearance of a normal 29-year-old veteran veterinary technician while secretly housing a collection of exotic venomous snakes in her spare bedroom. Her work at a local animal clinic had sparked an interest in reptiles that quickly evolved into an obsession with the most dangerous species she could legally acquire. Jennifer's collection had grown through careful purchases at reptile shows and online dealers, where she had built relationships with breeders who specialized in venomous species. She kept her hobby completely secret from friends, family, and co-workers, knowing that most people would consider her passion both dangerous and irresponsible. Her latest acquisition was a juvenile gaboon viper that she had purchased from a private breeder just 1 month earlier. The snake represented a significant step up in danger from her previous collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads. Records from her purchases and handling logs showed she had been gradually acquiring more challenging species, indicating a consistent pattern of increasing risk in the reptiles she chose to keep. Gaboon vipers are large African vipers, known for their thick bodies, broad heads, and exceptionally long fangs relative to their size. Adult specimens can exceed 6 feet and weigh more than 20 pounds, but juveniles, like the one Jennifer kept, are smaller with proportionally shorter fangs. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic and cytotoxic, capable of causing extensive tissue damage, severe bleeding, and dangerous drops in blood pressure, if not treated quickly. Although the species is capable of delivering large venom volumes, the effects vary depending on the size of the snake and the depth of the bite. Jennifer prepared to transfer the gaboon viper into a secured holding tub so she could perform routine enclosure maintenance. The open tub, a snake hook, and cleaning tools were found arranged beside the terrarium, indicating she was in the middle of a standard transfer procedure rather than casual cleaning. The position of the overturned tub and scattered equipment showed that the snake slipped from the hook during the transfer, landing on the enclosure floor near the opening. Gaboon vipers are heavy-bodied ambush predators, and even smaller specimens can shift their weight unexpectedly during handling. Based on the viper's final position, it had come to rest only a short distance from Jennifer's reach. When she attempted to redirect it toward the tub, the snake reacted at close range. From this short distance, the gaboon viper thrust forward in a powerful ambush-style strike. Bite marks on Jennifer's forearm showed deep penetration from fangs consistent with a juvenile specimen, and the surrounding blood pattern indicated a rapid, high-volume envenomation. After biting, the snake remained near the enclosure opening until responders later secured it. Evidence of the envenomation's effects appeared quickly. Blood droplets and a smeared handprint on the hallway wall showed she tried to steady herself as she moved toward the living room. Her bag of cleaning supplies was found overturned near the couch, suggesting she may have reached for it out of habit before her strength declined. Over the next 30 to 60 minutes, swelling and bleeding at the bite site progressed, and indicators in the living room, a collapsed posture near the couch and pooled blood on the floor, showed she attempted to sit before losing consciousness. When paramedics entered the home, they found Jennifer unresponsive and in cardiac arrest. Despite resuscitation attempts, the severity of the envenomation and the absence of appropriate antivenom in the region left no viable path for reversal. Following her death, wildlife officers initiated a review of her permits and handling practices, and the incident prompted renewed discussion among local officials about the risks associated with keeping exotic venomous species in residential areas. Wildlife officers and animal control personnel secured the gaboon viper on scene and transported it to a permitted holding facility. The remaining snakes in Jennifer's spare bedroom were removed for evaluation, as several species required state verification of proper documentation. Her employer at the veterinary clinic confirmed that none of the animals had ever been brought onto clinic property, so the workplace remained open, though staff were notified as part of the investigation's standard questioning. The home remained cordoned off for several hours while officers completed enclosure checks and inventory before it was released to her family. No immediate legal penalties were issued, but her permits and housing conditions were formally reviewed as part of routine post-incident procedures. It was May 17th, 2018, and the rural construction site in Georgia buzzed with activity as heavy equipment cleared forested land for a new subdivision development. Tommy Rodriguez operated his bulldozer with practiced skill, pushing aside trees and brush to make way for the planned homes. The 26-year-old heavy equipment operator had been working construction for 8 years, but he had no training in wildlife encounters despite working in areas where dangerous animals were common. Tommy was known among his co-workers for his fearless attitude and willingness to handle situations that other workers avoided. He was supporting his pregnant wife and was eager to impress his supervisors to secure a promotion that would provide better benefits for his growing family. The construction site was clearing habitat that had been home to various wildlife species, displacing animals and forcing them into contact with human activity. The forested area being developed had been undisturbed for decades, providing ideal habitat for various snake species, including some of the most venomous in North America. The construction activity was destroying dens and hiding places, forcing snakes into the open, where encounters with workers became inevitable. Company safety protocols required workers to report wildlife sightings to supervisors, but these rules were often ignored in the rush to complete projects on schedule. Eastern coral snakes are among the most venomous species in North America, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are secretive snakes that spend most of their time underground or hidden beneath logs and debris, making encounters with humans relatively rare. Coral snakes are often confused with harmless species, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive muscle paralysis, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Tommy was clearing brush with his bulldozer when the machine's blade uncovered what appeared to be multiple snakes sheltering independently under debris beneath a fallen log. Several snakes scattered as their hiding place was destroyed, but one coral snake appeared to be severely injured from the encounter with the heavy machinery. Tommy shut down his bulldozer to investigate, curious about the colorful snake he had uncovered. The coral snake lay motionless among the debris, its distinctive red, yellow, and black banding clearly visible in the afternoon sunlight. Tommy assumed the snake was dead, killed by his bulldozer during the clearing operation. He decided to pick up the snake to show his co-workers, thinking it would make an interesting conversation piece during their lunch break. Tommy reached down and grasped the coral snake with his bare hands, not realizing that the snake was only stunned and disoriented from its encounter with the bulldozer. The moment Tommy's hand made contact, the coral snake bit him on the palm, chewing for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Tommy dropped the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his palm, initially dismissing the bite as minor due to the snake's small size. His co-workers gathered around as Tommy explained what had happened, but none of them recognized the serious nature of a coral snake envenomation. The rural construction site was 35 minutes from the nearest hospital, and the delay in seeking medical treatment would prove fatal. Tommy's co-workers called 911, but the remote location of the construction site delayed the arrival of emergency medical personnel. Initially, Tommy experienced only mild symptoms and continued working, believing the bite was harmless due to the snake's small size. Several hours after the bite, the coral snake venom began its deadly progression through Tommy's system. The neurotoxic poison attacked his respiratory muscles, making breathing increasingly difficult. Tommy's speech became slurred as the neurotoxins affected his neuromuscular function, and his vision became blurred. By the time paramedics arrived, Tommy was experiencing severe respiratory distress. Tommy was transported to the rural hospital, but the facility had delayed recognition of the situation, delaying his need for intubation. Without access to mechanical ventilation to assist his breathing, Tommy's condition rapidly deteriorated as the coral snake venom caused progressive respiratory muscle paralysis. Tommy died from prolonged hypoxia due to untreated respiratory paralysis, as the coral snake venom caused complete paralysis of his breathing muscles. The neurotoxic poison had specifically targeted his respiratory system, making it impossible impossible for his body to maintain adequate breathing. The small size of the coral snake had deceived Tommy into thinking the bite was harmless, but the potent venom had proved fatal despite the snake's diminutive appearance. The investigation revealed that Tommy had violated company safety protocols by handling wildlife without proper training or equipment. His death devastated his pregnant wife and led to mandatory wildlife safety training for all construction crews working in areas where venomous snakes were present. The incident highlighted the hidden dangers faced by workers in industries that disturb natural habitats. Tommy's tragic encounter with an eastern coral snake became a cautionary tale about the importance of proper wildlife training for construction workers. His death left behind a widow and unborn child, serving as a stark reminder that even small snakes can be deadly when not treated with proper respect. It was August 4th, 2016, in South Jakarta, Indonesia. The night was heavy with damp air, the alleys behind the mid-rise office block nearly silent except for the faint buzz of insects near a dim security lamp. At that hour, in the shadow of stacked crates near the loading bay, something stirred that would turn a routine shift into a fatal encounter. Raffi Hadiman was 41, a quiet janitor who had worked nights in the building for nearly a decade. Known for his steady habits and reliability, he rarely spoke beyond polite greetings and spent most evenings moving methodically between floors with mop, broom, and bucket. His life was simple. He lived in a rented room not far from the complex, ate at the same street stall before each shift, and was respected among co-workers for his diligence. Raffi often accepted the solitude of night work, preferring the calm after tenants left, when the building belonged only to him and the guards. He took pride in his role, though it was unnoticed by most. His goal was steady income, not advancement, and he approached every task with quiet persistence. For him, working through the night in dim corridors felt ordinary, even when others remarked on strange noises or shadows by the garbage area. The loading dock sat at the back of the building, hemmed in by tall concrete walls and littered with plastic crates, trash bins, and scraps of food waste. Rats had become a regular nuisance, darting across the floor and squeezing through drainage gaps. Guards joked about something big hunting the rats, and just days earlier, grainy CCTV footage had captured a large, dark shape sliding near the garbage bins. Some workers speculated it was a python, a suspicion well-founded. Reticulated pythons thrive in such environments. Native to Southeast Asia, they are the world's longest snakes, often exceeding 20 feet. Though they prefer forests and wetlands, urban sprawl provides cover and prey in the form of rodents. A python this size is an ambush predator, lying in wait near consistent food sources. Its attack involves a rapid strike with recurved teeth, followed by immediate constriction, tightening coils with every exhale of the prey. Death typically comes by suffocation rather than broken bones. That night at the dock, when Raffi carried his mop bucket outside to dump dirty water, he paused briefly at the doorway, glancing towards the stacked crates. The security light flickered, and for a moment the shadows seemed deeper than usual. But treating everything as normal, he then stepped towards it. His routine felt safe, familiar, until it wasn't. At 2:15 a.m., CCTV cameras recorded the moment of attack. The bucket clattered onto the concrete as the python erupted from behind the crates, its body lunging forward with surprising speed. In the footage, Raffi staggered, arms splaying outward as coils locked around his torso. The python wound itself tighter, dragging him sideways to the ground. His kicks struck the floor hard, shoes scraping against the rough concrete. The constriction intensified within minutes. Raffi arched upward, his chest compressed under the snake's coils. His hands clawed weakly at the thick body binding him, but the python folded over his shoulders and neck. The camera captured his legs thrashing in wide arcs, shoes smearing streaks of dirty water across the ground. His struggles grew jerky, interrupted by gasps. The sound of his muffled cries carried faintly into the corridor, but the building remained silent inside. As the few minutes passed, his movements slowed. The footage showed his arms stiffening before dropping heavily against the floor. His legs continued with sporadic spasms, the final reflexes of a body starved of air. The python, steady and unrelenting, adjusted its grip, the thick muscles shifting visibly under the loading bay's dim light. The cameras caught the beginning of ingestion as the snake anchored its jaws onto his scalp before dragging him behind the stacked crate. crates, out of clear view. At dawn, when Rafi's absence was noticed, a supervisor checked the janitor's closet and found his cart untouched. Reviewing the overnight footage revealed the attack in full. Police sealed the area by mid-morning, locating the python still nearby, its massive body bulging unmistakably with human remains. Authorities euthanized the snake before cutting it open to recover him. The office closed for 2 days. On the loading dock where he had died, co-workers gathered for a prayer vigil, standing quietly as incense burned and offerings were set on the ground. The building management reinforced trash storage and rodent control, while city officials reminded property owners that food waste and vermin attract predators into urban spaces. It was June 18, 2023, when a teenage dare in rural Georgia turned deadly at an abandoned textile warehouse outside Valdosta. The crumbling industrial building had sat empty for over a decade, its broken windows and collapsed sections creating perfect shelter for wildlife seeking cool, dark spaces during the sweltering summer heat. The warehouse's basement storage areas provided ideal denning sites for Georgia's most dangerous reptiles. Jasmine Cole, a 17-year-old high school senior, had driven to the location with 4 friends seeking content for her social media accounts. Known for posting increasingly dangerous stunts to gain followers, Jasmine had built a reputation for taking risks that others wouldn't consider. Her boyfriend Marcus Johnson frequently encouraged these activities, while her best friend Ashley Martinez had grown concerned about Jasmine's escalating behavior. 2 years earlier, Jasmine had been bitten by a copperhead during a camping trip, requiring hospital treatment and creating potential sensitivity to snake venom proteins. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake stands as the largest venomous snake in North America and Georgia's most formidable serpent. These massive pit vipers can exceed 6 feet in length and possess the most potent venom of any North American rattlesnake. Their distinctive diamond pattern provides excellent camouflage among fallen leaves and debris. Eastern diamondbacks prefer secluded areas like abandoned buildings where they can establish dens. Their venom contains powerful hemotoxic compounds that destroy blood cells and tissue, along with proteins that can trigger severe allergic reactions in previously sensitized individuals. The group entered the warehouse through a broken loading dock door and began exploring before descending into the basement storage area. In a corner room filled with old machinery and concrete debris, they discovered a massive eastern diamondback coiled in the shadows. Upon detecting the intruders, the rattlesnake began vibrating its tail and raising its head in a defensive posture. Marcus immediately dared Jasmine to approach the agitated snake for a close-up video. Despite Ashley's attempts to physically stop her, Jasmine pushed past her friend to accept the challenge. Jasmine activated her phone's camera and began approaching the defensive rattlesnake, narrating her actions for the video. The snake continued rattling loudly as she moved closer, its heat-sensing pits tracking her movement. When Jasmine extended her phone to within 18 inches of the serpent, the eastern diamondback struck with explosive speed. Its massive fangs penetrated deep into her forearm, injecting a large amount of venom before she could react. Jasmine screamed and jerked backward as the snake maintained its grip briefly before releasing and coiling defensively again. The bite created 2 deep puncture wounds that began bleeding profusely. Her friends rushed to help as Marcus called emergency services while Ashley applied pressure to the wounds. The group helped Jasmine outside to wait for the ambulance, with her remaining conscious initially. However, within 10 minutes of the bite, Jasmine began developing symptoms that indicated her body was having an abnormal reaction to the venom due to her previous snakebite exposure. Red welts appeared across Jasmine's skin as her immune system recognized the similar venom proteins from her earlier copperhead bite. Her breathing became increasingly labored as her throat began swelling from the allergic reaction. The anaphylactic response progressed rapidly, with Jasmine's airway constricting as her body released massive amounts of histamine. Her friends watched helplessly as she struggled to breathe, her face and neck swelling visibly. Jasmine's condition deteriorated rapidly as anaphylactic shock set in. Her blood pressure dropped dramatically while her heart rate increased as her cardiovascular system struggled to maintain circulation. The swelling in her throat became so severe that air could barely pass through her airway. Her skin turned blue from lack of oxygen as respiratory failure began. 15 minutes after the bite, Jasmine lost consciousness as her brain was deprived of adequate oxygen. The remote location delayed emergency response, with paramedics arriving 28 minutes after the initial call. They immediately recognized the signs of severe anaphylaxis combined with snake envenomation. The team performed emergency intubation and administered epinephrine, corticosteroids, and antivenom treatment. However, Jasmine had been without adequate oxygen for over 10 minutes. Her brain had suffered significant damage from the prolonged hypoxia. Despite aggressive treatment, Jasmine's condition continued to deteriorate. The combination of severe allergic reaction, massive envenomation, and prolonged oxygen deprivation had caused irreversible damage to multiple organ systems. Jasmine died from respiratory failure and cardiovascular collapse caused by anaphylactic shock triggered by her previous sensitization to snake venom proteins. The incident prompted Georgia authorities to increase security around abandoned buildings and launch investigations into social media challenges involving dangerous wildlife encounters. Jasmine's school district implemented new programs educating students about the risks of seeking online fame through dangerous activities. It was November 3, 2013, in rural northeastern Namibia. A dry heat lingered under a pale sky as wind pushed dust across stretches of thorn scrub and scattered mopane trees. The tin roof of a small reptile rehabilitation outbuilding clicked softly as the metal shifted in the afternoon breeze. Inside the dim structure, wooden racks held plastic tubs and repurposed glass enclosures labeled in fading marker. The place was quiet in the way remote stations often are, where every sound, from a hinge settling to a sliding bin or a glove brushing plywood, seemed sharper than it should be. Selma Kashipa ran the rescue alone most days. At 41, she had left elementary teaching to take in snakes nobody else wanted, confiscations, surrenders, animals from failed roadside shows. She lived in a small trailer on the edge of the 20-acre property and kept a strict routine: feed logs, cleaning rotations, evening walkthroughs, so inspectors would find order even where money was short. Venomous intakes were recent and often arrived with little notice. She handled them with the tools she could afford and the practices she had learned from manuals and field guides. Donors knew her as steady and practical. She built racks from salvaged lumber, stretched every gallon of disinfectant, and drove borrowed coolers of non-venomous colubrids to school programs on weekends. Local officials started calling when other groups declined to take certain confiscations. Antivenom and rapid transport were not resources she had. Reliable medical support could be hours away. The rescue sat behind a wind-bent line of pines. A sand road cut to the outbuildings, where a lean-to covered 2 long shelves of enclosures. Light bled through board seams. The concrete floor was chalked with lime to mark walking lanes. A portable camera pointed down the main aisle to record husbandry and deter trespassers. Her latest intake that week had been a seized black mamba taken from a private owner who was keeping it illegally. Black mambas are native African elapids with potent neurotoxic venom and high venom yields for their size. Adults commonly exceed 6 feet in length, move quickly when provoked, and deliver venom that can cause progressive neuromuscular paralysis and respiratory failure without rapid antivenom and airway support. In remote regions where medical access is limited, the risk of rapid respiratory compromise rises substantially. Warnings had been stacking up in small ways. 2 weeks earlier, a volunteer sent photos showing a sagging upper rack. Brackets were rusted, and one screw head rounded smooth. Selma made a note to replace the supports, but kept feeding the animals that day. A notice from regional wildlife authorities had reminded permit holders to avoid solo work with dangerous species and to stage transfers at waist height. She acknowledged the message in a reply, but lacked extra hands. On the afternoon the incident occurred, the video shows her staging the move at dusk. A new glass tank sat on the suspect upper rack. A hook, a clear shield, and a pair of thin work gloves lay within reach. She slid the vented transport tub toward the shelf, left hand under the lip, right hand steadying. As the tub met the shelf edge, the front bracket shifted. The plank dipped a half inch. The tank slid forward, and she reached to steady multiple multiple enclosures. The mamba was pressed near the handle inside the vented tub. As the sudden slide tilted the container, the lid bounced. She steadied the tub with her left forearm and pushed with her right. The only path the snake had was toward the opening and the large warm object blocking it. From inches away, in confined space, a defensive strike occurred. In the confined opening of the tilted tub, the mamba delivered a single defensive strike before pulling back, a pattern documented when the snake has limited space to follow with additional bites. The camera misses the initial strike, but captures the immediate aftermath, a sharp jerk, the tub clattering to the floor, a hand lifted toward her collarbone as she stumbled back into the aisle. Blood appeared on the concrete and on the glove cuff. Later photographs showed 2 puncture wounds on the inner forearm where the fabric split. The hook clanged on the rack and lay still. The clear shield bore a smeared mark. She moved toward the office and opened a drawer where she kept gauze and antiseptic. The partially unwound gauze and scissors on the desk indicated an attempt at basic wound management. Her phone remained on the opposite counter, undisturbed. The scene suggested she focused first on stabilizing the immediate area, standard practice at the facility, before her symptoms progressed too far for further action. Within minutes, the recorded footage shows her posture change. Speech, when audible on the brief recovered clip, had become slurred and her breathing quicker. Early neurotoxic effects often begin with subtle cranial nerve impairment, difficulty focusing, drooping eyelids, and unsteady movements. In the recording, the progression is visible. She steadied herself on the desk before lowering into a chair as limb strength declined. Over the next 45 minutes, the deterioration continued. The camera captured increasingly shallow breathing, intermittent attempts to reposition herself, and long periods of immobility. A trail of drops led from the office back toward the aisle and ended beside a folding chair. A bottle of saline lay on its side. The combination of rapid neurotoxin onset, lack of antivenom, and the facility's isolation left no practical path to the airway support required for survival. The footage recorded her sliding partially out of the chair a little over an hour after the bite. No further movement followed. A volunteer arrived after dark for a scheduled check-in when messages went unanswered. He found the office light on, the phone on the floor, and Selma slumped near the chair with shallow pooling beneath her arm. He backed away and called 911 from the road. Paramedics reached the property and confirmed cardiac arrest. Animal control officers secured the mamba using tongs and a transport box before transferring it to a permitted facility. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as complications of untreated neurotoxic envenomation with respiratory failure. The punctured glove, the displaced shelf, and the scattered hardware matched a structural failure during an enclosure move. Remaining animals were inventoried and relocated over the next 2 days. Regional wildlife officers documented the scene and noted the solo work, absent antivenom, and deteriorating rack supports. No broader penalties were issued. The rescue closed quietly. Neighbors collected her personal effects, and the camera's final clip, recorded after the property was cleared, shows the upper rack still a fraction low on the right bracket. A small mechanical fault that, in the end, set the rest in motion. It was August 11, 2016, and the vast expanse of California's Mojave Desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun as Sarah Williams set up her campsite in a remote canyon far from civilization. The 31-year-old emergency room nurse had driven hours from Los Angeles to find the solitude she desperately needed, seeking refuge from the emotional turmoil of her difficult divorce proceedings. Sarah had been using solo camping trips as therapy to cope with the stress of her crumbling marriage and demanding career. She deliberately chose remote locations to avoid other people, finding peace in the harsh beauty of the desert landscape. This particular canyon offered the perfect combination of isolation and natural beauty, with towering rock formations providing shelter from the desert winds. Sarah was an experienced hiker and camper, but her knowledge of desert wildlife was limited. She had never encountered venomous snakes during her previous camping adventures, which had mostly taken place in less dangerous environments. The prescription anxiety medication she was taking to cope with her divorce had impaired her judgment and slowed her reaction time, making her more vulnerable to the dangers that lurked in the desert. The rocky outcrop, where Sarah chose to make camp, provided ideal habitat for one of North America's most dangerous serpents. She was unaware that the crevices and ledges around her campsite were perfect hiding places for snakes seeking shelter from the desert heat. Mojave rattlesnakes are among the most venomous snakes in North America, possessing a potent combination of neurotoxic and hemotoxic venom that makes their bites extremely dangerous. They are perfectly adapted to desert life, remaining hidden during the day and becoming active at dusk when temperatures cool. Mojave rattlesnakes are defensive when surprised or stepped on and will strike when threatened. Their venom contains both tissue-destroying hemotoxins and nerve-attacking neurotoxins, making envenomation potentially fatal without rapid antivenom and respiratory support. As the sun began to set, Sarah walked around her campsite in bare feet, enjoying the feeling of warm sand between her toes. The anxiety medication had made her feel relaxed and carefree, causing her to ignore basic desert safety precautions. She was focused on setting up her tent and preparing dinner, unaware that a large Mojave rattlesnake was coiled in the tall grass just steps away from her campsite. Sarah stepped directly on the hidden rattlesnake as she walked through a patch of desert grass. The snake struck immediately, its fangs penetrating deep into her ankle and injecting venom. Sarah screamed and jumped back, but the damage was already done. The Mojave rattlesnake had delivered a clinically significant envenomation into Sarah's bloodstream. Sarah was 20 miles from the nearest road, with no cell phone coverage in the remote canyon. She attempted to hike back to her vehicle, but over the following hours, the Mojave rattlesnake venom began its deadly work. The hemotoxic elements began destroying tissue at the bite site, while the neurotoxic components gradually affected her neuromuscular function. Sarah's ankle swelled rapidly as the venom destroyed blood vessels and tissue at the bite site. Over several hours, she began experiencing progressive neuromuscular paralysis as the neurotoxins interfered with nerve signals to her muscles. Her breathing became increasingly labored as the venom affected her respiratory muscles. Sarah wandered through the desert darkness, her impaired physical condition and the medication's effects preventing her from finding her way back to the road. The harsh desert environment compounded the effects of the snakebite, as dehydration and exposure to extreme temperature fluctuations added to her body's stress. She collapsed several times but managed to continue walking, driven by survival instinct, even as her condition deteriorated. The cooler desert nights provided some relief from the heat, allowing Sarah to survive longer than she might have during the day, but the combination of partial envenomation, dehydration, and exposure gradually overwhelmed her system. Her neuromuscular paralysis worsened over the days, making it increasingly difficult to move or seek shelter. Search and rescue teams found Sarah's body 4 days later, 2 miles from her original campsite. She had died from a combination of snakebite envenomation, severe dehydration, and exposure to the harsh desert conditions. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been taking prescription medication that impaired her judgment and reaction time, contributing to the tragic accident. Sarah's death highlighted the dangers faced by solo campers in remote desert areas where medical help is hours away. Her family was devastated by the loss, and the incident led to enhanced safety warnings for desert camping areas throughout California. It was March 2nd, 2018, deep in the Amazon basin of Brazil. The rainy season had flooded the lowland forest, turning fields of tangled roots and understory into a maze of dark water. In the village along the riverbank, fishermen carried on their routines as they always did. But that afternoon, one of those routines would slip into disaster. Eduardo Pereira was 38, a subsistence fisherman who had lived his entire life on the river's edge. He was respected among neighbors for his steady hand with nets and his willingness to share catches with families in lean times. Eduardo's habits were shaped by the river. He rose before sunrise, checked lines, and often spent long hours in silence on the water. His strength was in consistency, though those close to him knew he also had a tendency to dismiss risks as exaggerations. He had grown up hearing stories of jaguars, stingrays, and snakes in the flood season, but he always said the river provided if one respected it, and that he knew it its moods better than any outsider. Fishing was both survival and identity for Eduardo. With a wife and 2 children, his aim was simple: keep food steady and maintain the canoe and nets his father had passed down. During the high water months, fish often moved into flooded forest inlets, and nets snagged easily on submerged roots. The work was harder, the risks greater, but the catch was valuable. The inlet was still and oppressive, the canopy pressing close overhead. Branches drooped into water stained black with silt, and insects whined in dense clouds above the surface. Paddles dipped with muffled splashes as the canoe edged forward. In the shadows near the roots, water stirred in ripples that did not match the movement of fish. Green anacondas are among the heaviest snakes in the world, with females often exceeding 20 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds. They are ambush predators, lying submerged with only eyes and nostrils above water. When prey passes, they strike with startling speed, wrapping massive coils around the body. Unlike venomous snakes, they kill by constriction, tightening with each exhale of the victim until breathing becomes impossible. Earlier, an older fisherman in the village had mentioned unusual splashing in side inlets and urged them not to set nets so deep. The cousins themselves joked about forest monsters when they saw ripples near the bank, but the laughter was uneasy. As they pulled closer to their snagged net, Eduardo waved away concerns, saying the movement was probably large catfish. He leaned out of the canoe with confidence, bracing one foot on the side and tugging at the mesh caught among submerged roots. The water erupted without warning. A massive green anaconda surged upward. In a blur, it wrapped around Eduardo's torso and yanked him from the canoe. The net slipped from his hands, the lantern glow vanishing into water as his body hit with a heavy splash. His cousins shouted, stabbing at the surface with paddles, but the snake coiled tighter, dragging Eduardo beneath. From above, they glimpsed chaos, Eduardo thrashing, arms clawing for air, his head jerking up once before vanishing. The coils spun him sideways, pulling him deeper. The water frothed with bubbles, then stilled for a moment, then broke again as his legs kicked wildly. His cousin screamed his name, but the only answer was the harsh slapping of water and the deep swirl of the snake tightening. One cousin leapt into the shallows with a machete, hacking blindly into the murk. He slashed at coils when they broke the surface, cutting shallow gashes that bled into the black water. Eduardo's face flashed into view once, contorted and desperate, eyes wide above the coils crushing his ribs. Then he was dragged under again. The machete struck water and scale, but the snake rolled, pinning Eduardo deeper into the mud. The struggle lasted only minutes, Eduardo's movements slowing quickly as the coils crushed tighter. His arms weakened, then stopped clawing altogether. The bubbles became fewer, then ceased. The cousins kept hacking, shouting, splashing, but the water swallowed their noise. When silence fell, the inlet seemed undisturbed again, save for faint ripples spreading outward. The snake's bulk disappeared into deeper water, carrying Eduardo with it. They waited, terrified, until at last the surface calmed entirely. Hours later, they returned with other villagers, probing with poles and dragging the area with hooks. When they finally brought Eduardo's body up, it bore the marks of the coils, deep bruises wrapping across his chest and arms, ribs crushed inward. Mud clung to his skin, his mouth open as if still gasping for air. The snake had begun to engulf his upper torso before retreating at the disturbance, leaving signs of partial swallowing but little progress. The villagers drove it off, but no one claimed to have seen it again. That night, Eduardo's family gathered by the riverbank. His canoe was draped with flowers, and candles flickered against the dark water. Neighbors stood in silence, offering food and support to his wife and children. There was little ceremony beyond presence, the river itself holding the memory of what had happened. Local authorities visited briefly, noting the attack but avoiding publicity. They told villagers that such events were rare, part of the forest's balance, and urged caution during high water months. For those who lived on the river, the warning was no revelation. They already knew the risks, and they knew Eduardo's death would be remembered less as an anomaly and more as another proof that even experience and confidence could falter against the hidden power of the flooded forest. It was October 7th, 2023, when academic ambition led to a fatal encounter in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. Natalie Crawford, a 31-year-old marketing executive, had taken a weekend hiking trip with her boyfriend David Chen to celebrate her recent promotion. The couple had chosen a popular section of the Appalachian Trail near Shenandoah National Park, where well-maintained paths wound through dense hardwood forests. The thick leaf litter covering the forest floor provided perfect camouflage for the region's wildlife. David, a certified EMT with the Richmond Fire Department, had suggested the hiking trip as a way to unwind from Natalie's stressful work schedule. Natalie, an experienced hiker, appeared to be in excellent physical health. However, she had been managing type 2 diabetes for several years and had been under significant stress from working 12-hour days for months. Her compromised immune system from poorly controlled blood sugar levels had left her more vulnerable to infections. The October weather had been unusually warm, creating ideal conditions for reptiles that remained active later into the fall season. The copperhead represents one of the most common venomous snakes in Virginia. These pit vipers typically measure 2 to 3 feet in length and possess distinctive hourglass-shaped crossbands across their copper-colored bodies. Their excellent camouflage among fallen leaves makes them nearly invisible on forest floors during autumn months. Copperheads are generally docile snakes that prefer to remain motionless when threatened, relying on camouflage rather than aggressive behavior. Their hemotoxic venom is relatively mild compared to other pit vipers. While copperhead bites are painful, fatalities are extremely rare in healthy adults. The attack occurred during the afternoon as Natalie and David hiked along a scenic ridge trail. Natalie spotted a beautiful overlook and stepped off the main trail through thick fallen leaves to position herself for a photograph. The dense layer of colorful autumn foliage concealed a copperhead that had been resting in the warm afternoon sun. As Natalie moved into position, she inadvertently stepped within striking distance of the well-camouflaged snake. The copperhead struck defensively, its fangs penetrating through her hiking sock into her ankle. Natalie immediately felt sharp pain and looked down to see the snake quickly retreating. David rushed to her side and immediately recognized the bite, having received snakebite training during his EMT certification. He helped Natalie sit down and examined the wound, finding 2 distinct puncture marks that were bleeding moderately. David immediately called for emergency evacuation while applying basic first aid. A rescue helicopter arrived within 90 minutes and transported Natalie to the University of Virginia Medical Center. Emergency physicians determined that the bite did not require antivenom treatment, since copperhead envenomations rarely cause life-threatening symptoms. Natalie received supportive care, including pain medication, standard antibiotics, and tetanus prophylaxis. Her vital signs remained stable, and the swelling around the bite site was moderate. However, her elevated blood glucose levels from stress created an environment conducive to bacterial growth. Natalie's initial recovery progressed normally over the first 3 days. She was discharged home with oral antibiotics and instructions to monitor the wound site. However, her diabetes had been poorly controlled during the hospitalization due to stress. 2 days after discharge, Natalie developed increasing pain and redness around the wound site. She initially attributed the symptoms to normal recovery and delayed seeking medical attention. The infection had taken hold in the damaged tissue, thriving in the high glucose environment. When she finally returned to the emergency department, bacterial cultures revealed methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, a dangerous antibiotic-resistant strain. Despite immediate admission and aggressive treatment with vancomycin and other powerful antibiotics, the MRSA infection had already spread extensively through her leg tissue. The resistant bacteria proved difficult to control, and the infection progressed to necrotizing fasciitis. Surgeons performed multiple emergency procedures to remove infected tissue, but Natalie's compromised immune system and uncontrolled diabetes hindered her body's ability to fight the infection. The bacteria entered Natalie's bloodstream, causing suffering septic shock as her overwhelmed immune system could not contain the resistant infection. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously while her heart rate increased as her body tried to fight the systemic MRSA infection. Despite intensive care treatment, including multiple powerful antibiotics and surgical debridement, Natalie's organs began failing from overwhelming sepsis. Her kidneys stopped functioning properly and her cardiovascular system collapsed. Natalie died from septic shock and multiple organ failure 10 days after the original snakebite, killed not by venom but by a resistant bacterial infection that her compromised immune system could not overcome. David remained at her bedside throughout her hospitalization, devastated by how quickly a manageable injury had become fatal. The case prompted Virginia health officials to review protocols for treating snake bites in diabetic patients, emphasizing aggressive antibiotic therapy and closer monitoring for patients with compromised immune systems. Natalie Crawford showed how underlying health conditions can turn minor wildlife encounters into fatal complications. It was September 14, 2015, and the vast wetlands of Florida's Everglades National Park stretched endlessly under the early morning sun. The ancient ecosystem, with its maze of sawgrass prairies and cypress swamps, harbored some of North America's most dangerous reptiles. Dr. Richard Blackwood navigated through the dense vegetation, his boots squelching in the muddy terrain as he tracked the movement patterns of one of the region's most dangerous venomous animals. At 47, Dr. Blackwood had been studying venomous snakes for over 2 decades, building a reputation as one of the country's leading herpetologists. His research had taken him from the deserts of Arizona to the swamps of Louisiana, documenting snake behavior in their natural habitats. Blackwood had survived 2 previous snake bites during his career, experiences that had paradoxically made him more reckless rather than more cautious. He often dismissed safety protocols as amateur precautions, believing his experience made him immune to the dangers that threatened ordinary researchers. Blackwood had earned his doctorate before spending years building his reputation through increasingly dangerous fieldwork. His colleagues often warned him about his cavalier attitude toward safety, but Blackwood dismissed their concerns as the worries of desk-bound academics who lacked real field experience. This particular morning, Blackwood was conducting a solo research project on eastern diamondback rattlesnake den site fidelity, work that was crucial for securing his tenure at a prestigious university. He had been tracking the same population for months, documenting their seasonal movements and hunting patterns. He had consumed several drinks the night before to celebrate a colleague's retirement, leaving him dehydrated and fatigued as he began his morning fieldwork. The remote section of the Everglades where Blackwood worked was 3 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by foot through treacherous swampland. Cell phone coverage was non-existent in this wilderness, and Blackwood had deliberately chosen the isolation to avoid human interference with his subjects. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults reaching lengths of up to 8 feet and possessing fangs that can inject massive amounts of potent venom. They are ambush predators that rely on their excellent camouflage to remain hidden until prey comes within striking distance. Their venom contains powerful hemotoxins that destroy blood cells and tissue, causing massive internal bleeding and organ failure. Eastern diamondbacks are responsible for the most severe envenomations in North America, with their bites requiring immediate medical intervention to prevent death. Blackwood had been following fresh snake tracks through a dense patch of palmetto scrub when he spotted his target, a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback coiled beneath a fallen log. The snake's diamond-patterned scales provided perfect camouflage among the dappled shadows, and its massive girth indicated this was a mature male in prime condition. Instead of using his snake hooks and restraint tubes as protocol demanded, Blackwood decided to capture the snake manually to obtain what he called more natural behavioral data. His dehydration and fatigue had impaired his judgment, making the dangerous decision seem reasonable. Blackwood crouched beside the coiled rattlesnake and slowly extended his hand toward the animal's neck. intending to grab it just behind the head in the classic restraint position. The snake remained motionless, its black eyes fixed on the approaching threat. Blackwood's hand moved closer, his fingers spread wide to ensure a secure grip on the thick neck. The eastern diamondback struck with lightning speed, its massive head snapping forward faster than the human eye could follow. Blackwood's reflexes, dulled by fatigue and dehydration, were no match for the snake's explosive attack. The rattlesnake's 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Blackwood's wrist, injecting a medically significant dose of venom directly into his bloodstream. Blackwood jerked his hand back, but the damage was already done. The snake had delivered a high-volume envenomation, pumping a substantial amount of venom into Blackwood's circulatory system. Blackwood stared at the 2 puncture wounds on his wrist as blood began to flow, the venom's effects beginning to take hold. Over the next hour, Blackwood began experiencing progressive symptoms of severe envenomation. His wrist swelled gradually as the venom began destroying tissue at the bite site, while his blood's ability to clot became increasingly compromised. Blackwood attempted to walk back toward his vehicle, but the 3-mile journey through difficult terrain became increasingly difficult as the venom spread through his system. The hemotoxic venom attacked Blackwood's red blood cells and blood vessels, causing progressive coagulopathy that prevented normal clotting. After several hours of struggling through the swamp, Blackwood collapsed from shock and organ failure, his body overwhelmed by the systemic effects of the envenomation. Blackwood's university reported him missing when he failed to return from his research expedition. Park rangers found his body 2 days later, following the GPS coordinates from his research permit. The investigation revealed that Blackwood had violated multiple safety protocols by working alone without communication equipment and attempting to handle venomous snakes without proper restraint tools. The herpetology community was shocked by the loss of such an experienced researcher, but many colleagues noted that Blackwood's increasingly reckless behavior had made such a tragedy almost inevitable. His death led to stricter safety requirements for researchers working with venomous species in national parks. It was September 23, 2016, in a desert edge community of North Scottsdale, Arizona, where upscale residential developments bordered the pristine Sonoran Desert. The area was characterized by luxury homes built directly against protected desert preserve land, creating a unique interface between human habitation and wild terrain. Temperatures during late September typically ranged from 65 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Conditions that kept desert wildlife active during nighttime hours. The community had experienced a notable increase in rattlesnake encounters due to ongoing drought conditions that drove snakes closer to residential water sources. Olivia Smith, 31-year-old night shift medical technician at a regional healthcare facility, had been struggling with mounting gambling debts accumulated over the previous 18 months. Her financial situation had deteriorated to the point where she faced potential eviction from her apartment and had exhausted all legitimate borrowing options. Colleagues at the medical facility had noticed her increasing stress and frequent absences, though none were aware of the extent of her financial crisis or her desperate measures to resolve it. For 2 months prior to this incident, Olivia had been systematically casing middle-class neighborhoods throughout the Scottsdale area, identifying homes with absent owners and vulnerable entry points. Her method involved observing residential patterns during her off hours, noting when homeowners left for extended periods, and identifying properties with minimal security measures. The target location she selected belonged to Harold Davis, an elderly retiree whose routine she had monitored for 3 weeks. The Davis residence was a single-story ranch home built in 1987, featuring an elevated wooden back porch that provided approximately 3 feet of clearance above the desert floor. The property backed directly onto protected desert preserve land, where wildlife regularly moved between natural terrain and residential structures seeking shelter and water. Local homeowners had reported frequent encounters with javelinas, coyotes, and various snake species, particularly during warmer months when animals sought cooler daytime refuges under human structures. Olivia Olivia had observed that the elderly couple frequently left their rear sliding door unlocked and had departed 5 days earlier to visit family in California. Her plan, as later reconstructed from evidence and witness statements, involved accessing the property through the desert approach to avoid street-facing surveillance and entering through the rear sliding door she had confirmed was accessible. The western diamondback rattlesnake, scientifically known as Crotalus atrox, is the largest venomous snake species in Arizona and one of the most dangerous reptiles in North America. These heavy-bodied serpents typically measure 3 to 5 feet in length, with exceptional specimens reaching up to 7 feet. Their potent hemotoxic venom contains powerful enzymes that destroy blood cells, damage tissue, and disrupt the circulatory system. Western diamondbacks are known for their defensive behavior when cornered, producing their characteristic rattle warning before striking. However, in confined spaces or when surprised, they may strike without warning. The species commonly seeks shelter under porches, sheds, and other human structures during hot weather, making encounters with homeowners and intruders alike a documented occurrence in desert communities. According to evidence recovered at the scene and forensic reconstruction, Olivia approached the Davis residence around 1 a.m., having parked her vehicle 3 blocks away on a residential side street. She carried a small backpack containing burglary tools, including a pry bar, screwdrivers, and latex gloves. Her approach route took her through approximately 200 yards of desert terrain before reaching the property's rear boundary. The attack occurred when Olivia crawled under the elevated back porch structure to access the sliding door. Phone records indicated her last activity at 1:47 a.m., providing investigators with a precise timeline. The crawl space beneath the porch measured approximately 3 feet in height and extended 8 feet towards the house foundation. She used her phone's flashlight to navigate the confined space, which had accumulated desert debris and provided ideal denning habitat for reptiles. Midway through the crawl space, her light illuminated a western diamondback rattlesnake coiled directly in her path. The snake, measuring approximately 4.5 feet in length, had established a den site in the space several weeks earlier, as evidenced by shed skin fragments recovered during the investigation. When her light illuminated the western diamondback rattlesnake in the confined space, it struck immediately without producing its characteristic warning rattle. The first strike hit Olivia on the upper left arm, near the shoulder, delivered as she crawled forward and unintentionally entered the rattlesnake's strike range. The narrow crawl space prevented her from standing or retreating quickly, leaving her upper body exposed. Startled and trying to push herself backward, she shifted her weight and extended her right hand directly into the snake's defensive coil. This sudden movement triggered a second strike, with the rattlesnake's fangs penetrating the back of her right forearm rather than her hand. Both bites occurred within seconds of each other, resulting in what medical experts later classified as massive envenomation. Olivia managed to crawl backward out of the space, but collapsed immediately in the backyard. The double envenomation had delivered an unusually large cumulative venom load, far exceeding survivable levels without immediate anti-venom treatment. Her phone sustained damage during the encounter, either from impact or moisture, preventing her from calling for emergency assistance. The venom began its destructive process immediately, causing severe pain, rapid swelling at both bite sites, and systemic effects throughout her body. Within 30 minutes, both bite locations had swollen significantly, with her left shoulder and right forearm becoming visibly distorted. The hemotoxic venom began destroying red blood cells and damaging blood vessel walls, leading to internal bleeding and falling blood pressure. Her breathing grew increasingly labored as the venom disrupted her circulatory system and blood chemistry. The massive dose of venom caused a rapid onset of coagulopathy, preventing her blood from clotting properly. Bleeding began at both bite sites and internally throughout her body. Her blood pressure dropped to critical levels as the venom continued its systemic destruction of her circulatory system. Within 1 hour of the initial bites, she had lost consciousness due to hemorrhagic shock. Death occurred several hours after the initial envenomation, as progressive circulatory failure and cascading organ shutdown overwhelmed her system. The venom's disruption of blood clotting caused widespread internal hemorrhaging, while venom-induced tissue destruction and metabolic collapse placed catastrophic strain on her kidneys and cardiovascular system. The resulting coagulopathy and multi-organ failure proved fatal, despite her age and previously good health. Post-mortem examination revealed extensive internal bleeding, marked coagulation failure, and severe tissue necrosis, consistent with advanced western diamondback rattlesnake envenomation. Neighbor Mrs. Patterson discovered Olivia's body at 6:30 a.m. while walking her dog along the desert preserve boundary. She immediately contacted emergency services upon seeing the body in the Davises' backyard. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, though Olivia had been deceased for several hours. Detective Ray Martinez led the investigation, which quickly revealed the criminal nature of Olivia's presence at the property. Evidence recovered included burglary tools, latex gloves, and a pry bar found near her body. Her vehicle was located 3 blocks away, with additional burglary equipment inside. Footwear impressions matched her path from the desert approach to the backyard, confirming her intended route of entry. The medical examiner's autopsy confirmed death by western diamondback rattlesnake envenomation, with massive tissue damage and coagulopathy from double envenomation. Toxicology reports ruled out alcohol or drug involvement. The investigation revealed Olivia's gambling debts and financial desperation, providing a clear motive for the attempted burglary. Olivia's family expressed shock at learning about her criminal activities and gambling addiction, stating they were unaware of her financial problems. Her employer confirmed her recent performance issues and unexplained absences. The case highlighted the intersection of personal desperation and wildlife encounters in desert communities. The incident was officially classified as an accidental death during the commission of a felony. Local authorities used the case to remind residents about securing their properties and the importance of professional wildlife removal services. The Davis family returned from their trip to find their property had become a crime scene, though they expressed sympathy for Olivia's family, despite the circumstances. While Olivia's fatal encounter with Arizona's deadliest rattlesnake demonstrated how criminal desperation could lead to unexpected wildlife encounters, other incidents across the globe continue to reveal the deadly consequences when humans underestimate nature's most dangerous predators. From the remote jungles of Southeast Asia to the urban centers of South America, apex predators continue to claim lives in ways that defy human expectations and challenge our understanding of wildlife behavior. It was May 13, 2017, in a rural village in Uttar Pradesh, India. The day had been long and hot. By dusk, the village was quieting, but in the back shed of a modest grain mill worker's house, tension built unseen. Anil Singh was 34, a man whose reputation was split between his reliability at the mill and his troubling hobby. To his neighbors and co-workers, he was steady, a man who put in long shifts grinding grain to provide for his wife and their 2 young children. But to those closest to him, Anil was stubborn, drawn to risk in ways that unsettled his family. He had taken to collecting snakes years earlier, calling it a symbol of luck and power. Despite his wife's disapproval, he kept them in small boxes stacked in a dark shed, boasting to co-workers that he could handle them without fear. It was a pursuit that fed his pride, even as it frayed the patience of those who cared for him. Handling snakes had become more than a pastime. It was his way of carving out a unique identity in a village where most lives looked the same. He told himself he understood their movements, that his experience gave him a mastery others lacked. That confidence made his decisions understandable, even if deeply flawed. He had survived so many close calls, so many brushes with striking hoods and bared fangs, that he convinced himself he could not be the one undone. The king cobra he kept was the largest snake in the shed, measuring over 11 feet. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes in the world, capable of raising a 30 1/3 of their bodies off the ground and delivering venom that attacks the nervous system, leading to paralysis and respiratory failure. Unlike smaller cobras, they do not rely on a single strike, but can deliver multiple bites in quick succession. Their hood display is not just for show. It is a defensive warning rarely ignored without consequence. Previously, neighbors had heard the hissing from the shed, urging Anil to let the animals go. A co-worker had walked away that very morning after watching him tap the cobra's hood with his fingers as if daring it to strike. Even his wife, standing often in the doorway, pleaded for him to stop. But to Anil, the repetition of these gestures without harm reinforced his belief that he had control. The risks were dismissed as the talk of people who did not understand. That evening, he decided to transfer the cobra into a sturdier wooden crate. His wife stood in the doorway, tense, repeating her pleas. His brother-in-law, visiting the house, lingered behind her uneasily. Anil used a pair of long tongs, lifting the snake from its box. At first, the cobra swayed, hood spread wide, body coiling against the steel grip. Then, with sudden precision, it twisted free and lunged, fangs driving deep into the back of his hand. He dropped the tongs instantly, grabbing his wrist, blood welling from the punctures. The snake struck again before he could retreat, sinking its fangs into his thigh as he stumbled back. His brother-in-law tried pulling him toward the doorway, but Anil's legs buckled, his face tightening with pain. His wife screamed as he collapsed onto the dirt floor, the cobra recoiling into the corner, still flared and watchful. Neighbors rushed over after hearing the commotion. With the help of 2 men, his brother-in-law dragged Anil out of the shed and into a cart. They pushed him quickly through the narrow streets to a government clinic 2 miles away. By then, his speech was already slurred, his body jerking uncontrollably. The clinic staff laid him on a cot and tried to stabilize him, but when asked about anti-venom, the nurse shook her head. Only basic medicines and intravenous fluids were available. King Cobra anti-venom was stocked only in larger hospitals hours away. Within 20 minutes of arriving, Anil's chest movements slowed to erratic gasps. His limbs stiffened in violent spasms before collapsing limp on the cot. Foam streaked his mouth and chin as his wife cried at his side, clutching his hand. The staff could only pronounce what had already become clear. Without anti-venom, there was nothing to stop the poison. He died moments later. The forest department arrived later that week, removing the surviving snakes and nailing shut the shed's doors. Notices were posted warning against private keeping of venomous animals, though most admitted such rules were rarely enforced. For his family, the loss cut deeper than any penalty. His wife abandoned the house entirely, moving with the children to her parents' home, leaving behind the dark shed that had come to symbolize his pride and his downfall. It was September 3rd, 2016, and the small Pentecostal church in rural Kentucky sat quiet in the fading evening light. The white wooden building, surrounded by rolling hills and tobacco fields, had been Pastor William Hayes's spiritual home for over 2 decades. Inside, the simple sanctuary held just 20 pews, a modest altar, and a locked room behind the pulpit where Billy kept his collection of venomous snakes. The practice of snake handling had been part of his faith since he was a young man, and at 52, he had survived countless encounters with deadly serpents that would have killed most people. Billy Hayes had been handling venomous snakes in religious services for 20 years, following a tradition rooted in a literal interpretation of biblical scripture. His congregation had once numbered over 100 faithful believers, but changing times and several close calls with snake bites had reduced his flock to fewer than 30 regular attendees. In recent months, Billy had become increasingly desperate to prove his faith and reinvigorate his ministry, taking greater risks with larger and more aggressive snakes during services. The snake room behind his altar housed 6 venomous serpents, but none commanded more respect and fear than Rex, a massive eastern diamondback rattlesnake that Billy had acquired from a dealer in Georgia. The 6-foot male was one of the largest specimens of its species, with a body as thick as a man's arm and a rattle that could be heard across the sanctuary when agitated. Rex had never been handled during services, deemed too dangerous even by Billy's standards, but lately, the pastor had been considering incorporating the massive rattler into his demonstrations of faith. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, capable of reaching lengths over 7 feet and possessing enough venom to kill multiple adult humans. Their hemotoxic venom destroys blood cells and tissue, causing massive internal bleeding, organ failure, and excruciating pain. A single bite from a large specimen can inject enough venom to kill 20 people, and their strike speed is faster than the human eye can follow. They are notoriously aggressive when threatened and will strike repeatedly if cornered. That evening, Billy had come to the church alone for what he called a private prayer session. His congregation was dwindling, his faith was being questioned by other pastors in the area, and he felt called to prove his spiritual connection through an ultimate test. He unlocked the snake room and approached Rex's enclosure, where the massive rattlesnake lay coiled in the corner, his distinctive diamond-patterned scales catching the fluorescent light. The snake's head was raised, tongue flicking rapidly, and his tail buzzed ominously as Billy opened the cage. Billy reached into the enclosure without any protective equipment, believing his faith would shield him from harm. Rex immediately went into a defensive posture, coiling tighter and raising his head higher, his rattle creating a continuous warning sound that echoed through the small room. But Billy ignored these clear signs of aggression, grasping the snake behind the head and attempting to lift him from the cage. Rex's powerful body thrashed violently, his muscles straining against Billy's grip as the pastor tried to drape the massive serpent around his shoulders. The first strike came as Billy lifted Rex from the enclosure. The snake's head twisted with lightning speed, his fangs sinking deep into Billy's forearm and injecting a massive dose of venom directly into his bloodstream. Billy cried out but didn't release his grip, believing this was a test of his faith. Rex struck again immediately, this time catching Billy's neck just below his jaw, pumping even more venom into his victim's circulatory system. The hemotoxic venom began its devastating work within seconds. Billy's arm swelled rapidly around the first bite site, the tissue turning dark as blood vessels ruptured beneath his skin. The neck bite was even more dangerous, with venom spreading quickly toward his heart and brain. Billy staggered backward, finally releasing the snake, which immediately coiled in the corner and continued its aggressive display. Billy collapsed within minutes as the massive dose of venom overwhelmed his system. His blood pressure plummeted as internal bleeding began throughout his body. His organs started shutting down one by one, first his kidneys, then his liver, as the venom destroyed tissue faster than his body could repair it. With no one present to call for emergency medical help, Billy died alone on the floor of his church, his body convulsing as the venom completed its deadly work. Rex remained coiled in the corner, his rattle still buzzing softly, when Billy's wife found his body the next morning. She had come to the church looking for her husband after he failed to return home the previous night. The massive rattlesnake was still alive and aggressive, requiring animal control officers with specialized equipment to safely remove him from the building. The Kentucky State Police investigation ruled Billy's death accidental, noting that he had violated basic safety protocols for handling venomous snakes. The church's snake handling license was revoked, and the remaining serpents were relocated to licensed facilities. Billy's death made national news, reigniting debates about religious snake handling practices and their inherent dangers. Billy's funeral drew hundreds of mourners from across the region, including many who had opposed his snake handling practices but respected his dedication to his faith. His congregation disbanded after his death, unable to continue without their charismatic leader, and the small church building was eventually sold to another denomination. It was October 14th, 2017, in a residential neighborhood outside Sacramento, California. The finished basement had been converted into what appeared to be a professional reptile facility, with custom-built wooden shelving and sophisticated lighting systems. Carl Fleming was 38, a former warehouse supervisor who had become convinced he understood snake breeding after purchasing and memorizing a comprehensive 800-page reptile breeding manual written by European herpetologists. Carl had focused on the profit potential sections, while skipping over the extensive safety warnings and experience requirements outlined throughout the book. He had created elaborate charts and schedules based on the manual's breeding protocols, but had never worked with experienced breeders or handled live venomous snakes before purchasing his collection. The basement operation looked impressive to anyone who didn't know better, with labeled containers and detailed record-keeping systems copied directly from the manual's organizational suggestions. However, Carl's handling technique involved using modified aquarium equipment and homemade restraint devices that he had constructed based on equipment diagrams in his manual, without any understanding of their proper application or critical safety features. Carl had invested thousands of dollars in his setup, purchasing expensive temperature control equipment and professional-grade lighting systems. The impressive appearance of his facility had convinced him that he was operating at the same level as experienced breeders, despite having zero hands-on training or mentorship from anyone who actually knew what they were doing. Carl's basement was completely isolated from the main house, with thick walls that would muffle any sounds of distress. His family was unaware of the true extent of his collection, believing he kept only a few harmless snakes for educational purposes. The basement's separate entrance meant Carl could work for hours without anyone knowing his activities, schedule, or condition. Eastern coral snakes are highly venomous elapids, averaging 2 to 3 feet in length, with distinctive red, yellow, and black banding. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing progressive paralysis, respiratory failure, and death if untreated. Unlike hemotoxic venoms that cause obvious local tissue damage, coral snake venom produces minimal initial symptoms at the bite site, while systematically shutting down the victim's nervous system. Bites may seem minor initially, but the neurotoxic effects can progress rapidly to complete respiratory paralysis and death within hours. Carl's critical error came when he made a decision that perfectly demonstrated how dangerous a little knowledge can be. He decided to separate 2 eastern coral snakes that had been housed together based on his manual's breeding recommendations. But Carl had completely misunderstood the species' behavioral patterns and handling requirements. The 2 coral snakes had been coexisting peacefully, but Carl was convinced they needed individual housing based on a breeding protocol he had misinterpreted from his manual. In reality, the snakes were not showing any signs of stress or aggression, but Carl's interference would create a dangerous situation that his inexperience couldn't handle. Carl decided to use his homemade restraint tube, which he had constructed from PVC pipe based on a diagram in his manual. Carl had misunderstood the critical measurements and safety features, creating a device that was not only useless, but actually more dangerous than no restraint at all. The tube opening was too large to provide proper control, and the length was insufficient for safe handling of the species. As Carl attempted to guide the first coral snake into his inadequate restraint device, the snake immediately began struggling against the tube. The animal's defensive behavior escalated as Carl tried desperately to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his capabilities. Carl made the fatal decision to reposition the tube to gain better control, apparently believing he could manage an increasingly stressed, venomous snake through trial and error. The coral snake managed to twist around the pathetic restraint and strike at Carl's right hand, sinking its small but deadly fangs into the webbing between his thumb and index finger and delivering a full load of neurotoxic venom before Carl could react. Carl immediately dropped the useless tube and stepped back, examining what appeared to be 2 tiny puncture wounds with minimal bleeding. Unlike the dramatic tissue damage he had read about with other venomous species, the coral snake bite looked almost insignificant, a deception that would prove fatal. Following his manual's emergency protocol section to the letter, he immediately noted the time of the bite and began documenting his symptoms in a notebook, apparently believing this academic exercise was more important than getting immediate medical treatment. The manual's description of coral snake envenomation mentioned that symptoms could be delayed, but Carl interpreted this to mean he had plenty of time to observe and record his condition. Carl spent 30 precious minutes following the manual's suggested first aid procedures, applying a loose bandage and keeping the wound below heart level while carefully recording his observations. He was treating a serious medical emergency like a science experiment, following protocols designed for research settings rather than recognizing that he needed immediate professional medical intervention. During this critical time, the neurotoxic venom began its silent assault on Carl's nervous system. Unlike hemotoxic venoms that cause immediate pain and swelling, the coral snake's neurotoxins produced subtle initial symptoms that Carl dismissed as anxiety. He noted mild tingling around the bite site and slight nausea, symptoms he attributed to stress rather than recognizing them as early signs of systemic envenomation. As the venom spread through his lymphatic system, Carl began experiencing more concerning symptoms. His vision became slightly blurred, and he noticed difficulty focusing on his notebook entries. A slight slurring of his speech developed, which he initially attributed to nervousness. The manual had mentioned these as possible symptoms, but Carl believed he was still in the early observation phase. Carl continued documenting his condition for another 20 minutes, not realizing that the neurotoxic venom was rapidly progressing toward respiratory paralysis. By the time he recognized the severity of his situation, his breathing had become noticeably labored, and he was experiencing significant difficulty swallowing. Carl attempted to climb the basement stairs to call for help, but the neurotoxins had begun affecting his coordination and respiratory muscles. Halfway up the stairs, his legs gave out, and he collapsed, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow as the venom systematically shut down his nervous system. Carl lost consciousness on the basement stairs as respiratory paralysis set in. His family, unaware of his activities, did not discover him until several hours later, when they noticed he had missed dinner. By the time they found him and called emergency services, Carl had suffered prolonged respiratory arrest. Emergency responders attempted resuscitation, but Carl had been without adequate oxygen for too long. Despite aggressive efforts including intubation and cardiac support, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from respiratory failure caused by coral snake envenomation, with the critical delay in discovery preventing any possibility of successful treatment. The investigation revealed that Carl had collapsed approximately 35 minutes after the bite, well before his family discovered him. Medical experts testified that immediate medical intervention might have saved his life, but the isolated location of his basement operation and his family's lack of awareness about his activities had created a fatal delay in discovery and treatment. The basement investigation revealed an extensive collection with detailed records and charts copied from Carl's breeding manual. The manual was found open to the emergency treatment section, with handwritten notes showing Carl's methodical attempts to follow protocols that were completely inappropriate for his situation. Several animals had died from stress-related illnesses caused by improper housing combinations that Carl had misunderstood from the manual's breeding instructions. Carl's death was ruled accidental, caused by envenomation from illegally possessed venomous reptiles, with delayed discovery preventing medical intervention. Animal control officers required assistance from reptile specialists to safely remove and relocate the surviving 42 animals to appropriate facilities.